Welcome back to our ODG Shorts series, where, through the memoirs and historical recollections of Sir Anthony Brutus Babington, we peer back through the sands of time as he reflects on a life in golf and some of the projects, challenges, opportunities and compromises that were encountered and overcome as the Royal Portrush Golf Club expanded eastwards towards White Rocks and Dunluce Castle beyond. The Portrush Golf Club was formed in 1888. My acquaintance with its clubhouse and courses start from about 1897, when I first began to play the game, more or less regularly. At that time, the old clubhouse had been built, and there were two courses, the men's and the ladies'. Both courses had 18 holes, and started and ended near that clubhouse, which still exists at the end of Dunluce Street, and there were holes on the south side of Crocknamack Road, the green of one known as Cameron's being where the houses in Randall Park now stand. The men's course ended about the tavern, and from that point to the White Rocks, including the War Hollow and the Far Hollow, the links were undeveloped. Those were the days of the Gutty Ball, and the courses were very popular and thronged with visitors in the summer. The great development of the game had not then arrived, and natural courses like Portrush had few competitors. The golf in those days was good, and among the men Jock Stuart Moore and Hubert Webb, and after them Harold Reed, Oswald Webb, Charlie Stewart Moore, Jack and Arthur Stewart, and many other really good players were constant competitors in the club competitions, which were very well supported, especially the 9-hole knockout match play competitions at the Easter and October meetings. There was always an American selling tickets on these events with a 5-shilling entry. The auction took place in the Railway Hotel and was well supported, especially by our first captain, Admiral Alexander. I often made a few pounds out of this, and on one occasion Arthur Stewart and I divided £45. These activities were frowned upon by the authorities and ultimately suppressed, but they were innocent enough, and they undoubtedly helped to develop match play temperament and to popularise the club events, which afterwards fell continuously in popularity, prestige, until the recent revival of the competitive spirit. In the ladies' club, May Heslett and her sisters Rona Adair and Daisy Stewart were the outstanding players, and we have not seen any quite so good in later years. There were constant changes in the courses from the beginning until 1932, when a comprehensive layout was adopted, which it is to be hoped will be final in its major aspects. These changes may be seen on the plan prepared by George Nash, now hanging in the clubhouse. Some of these were improvements and some not so good. In no case were they as good as they might have been, and constant changing made it difficult to give the individual holes the finish they required. Tenure also was a difficulty. The founders evidently thought that the game was a fashion and would be liable to fade out, for they erected the clubhouse on ground held for less than 21 years, and spent a couple of £1,000 on it, which was a large outlay in those days. The town end of the course was then, as now, held under Lord Antrim, and the original lease expired about 1907, whereupon protracted negotiations took place for a renewal. Unfortunately, the club fell out with the then Earl, and he refused to give a renewal, but finally agreed to make a lease to the railway company, then the Northern Counties Railway, for 60 years from 1909. And they, in their turn, were sublet to the club. The rent agreed on was to be £500 a year, and the railway company made it a condition that visitors and members should be allowed to play on Sundays. To enable the railway company to enter into this lease, it became necessary for them to promote a bill at Westminster. But someone approached the nationalist members, and through Joe Devlin, who had a crow to pick with the railway company, succeeded in blocking the bill in the House of Commons. This lease was therefore never executed, but the railway company paid to Lord Antrim the £500 rent each year as tenants from year to year, and permitted the club to continue in occupation of the clubhouse and links in consideration of a rent of £300 a year, a state of affairs which did not come to an end until 1928. The club accordingly had no tenure and did not even own its clubhouse. At this time, the club appears to have been considering further developments and improvements to the courses, and leases were obtained on the lands beyond Lord Antrim's ground. These lands, except Rankin's, run in strips from the main road to the sea, and belonged to the following families: Morrow, McElhargy, Burns, Macaulay, Knox and McVicar. Leases were finally executed in respect of all these lands about 1909, save for those belonging to Knox and McVicar, in respect of which options were taken, but these were eventually allowed to run out. Portion of these new lands to the tavern was developed prior to 1914 by making of the old 9th and 10th holes, now reversed as Duvarren and Causeway holes. But no general development was undertaken, and in 1921 the tenure remained as it had been when the lease to the railway company fell through. In 1922 or 1923, I became a member of the council, having left Dublin in 1922 to practice at the bar in Belfast. Daniel McLaughlin was then captain, and he and I and one or two go-ahead members of the council, having made a general survey of the club and its prospects, came to the conclusion that the time had arrived, if it was not overdue, for a complete overhaul of its property and government. The first move was to carry out a revision of the rules. This had not been done for a long time, if ever, and experience had proved that in the case of a club situated in a non-metropolitan area like Portrush, and with a widely scattered membership, it is essential to have some method of enabling the general body of members to express their wishes at general meetings without being present in person. Otherwise, the club tends to be governed solely by the few who happen to reside in the immediate neighbourhood of the clubhouse and have time to attend general meetings. A rule enabling them to vote by proxy was therefore introduced into the new draft rules, which it was hoped the club would endorse. There were also other rules to be added and amended, and amongst the existing rules there were two which subsequently gave rise to acute controversy. The first provided that golf should not be played on Sunday, or the bar or billiard room kept open. This was apparently an original rule of the club, and at an early stage in the club's history, there had been abortive attempts to repeal it, insofar as it prohibited golf on Sunday, whereupon the opponents of Sunday golf, led by the Provost of Trinity, Dr. Trail, in order to strengthen the Sabbatarian defences, proposed and carried a further rule to the effect that the prohibitionary rule could only be repealed by a 2/3 majority. This addition was omitted from the proposed new rules, which were printed, circulated to all the members, and passed at a general meeting after considerable argument. Shortly after these rules had been adopted, the council called a general meeting to repeal the rule prohibiting Sunday golf, whereupon the opponents got busy and organised opposition by every means at their disposal, and complained bitterly they had been deceived and misled by the omission of the 2/3 majority rule when the rules were revised. They argued that their attention had not been called to this omission, and they had not themselves noticed it, and were therefore trapped. There was in fact no substance to this complaint, even if it had been sound, which it subsequently turned out not to be. But to this day, there are people who believe that the council were guilty of some form of moral obliquity in not advertising to this change in the rules. The general meeting was a really brisk affair. The captain was told in council that he could not propose the resolution, and Colonel Elliot then offered to propose it, and I offered to second it. It was to be a matter of voting, and I intended to say nothing which would make my life unpleasant in the club, whichever way the decision might go. But the atmosphere had risen considerably by the date of the meeting, and shortly before it began, I suddenly thought I would ask the colonel what he was going to say. I took him into the secretary's room, where he exploded with rage, and told me that he was going to tell his own clergy what he thought of them, giving me at the same time a few points from his speech. He was livid with rage over the things that were being bandied around by the clerical party, and vowed that he would show them up for objecting to a harmless game of golf on Sunday, while shutting their eyes to other more blameworthy activities of their flock, which he proposed to advert to in some detail. When he cooled off, I told him he could not possibly take that line, and that the outcome was merely a question of votes, and the less he or I said, the better. I finally persuaded him in his actual speech. He was as tame as a church mouse, though I have ever since regretted that I did not hear him address the opposition in the spirit of rage and indignation in which I had found him half an hour earlier. When I was seconding the resolution, a fundamentalist doctor from Bushmills interjected that this was the thin end of a wedge of the Continental Sunday. In Ulster, the Continental Sunday ranks with the Scarlet Woman as a bogey with cloven hooves, horns and tail, and has become a term of abuse. But for all I know, the Ulster Sunday, or the Scotch, of which I have youthful recollections, may be held over the heads of continental children by their parents and pastors as a threat when they show signs of becoming dangerously independent, and properly understood this threat should be no less potent abroad than its obverse is here. When this motion had been proposed and seconded and was open for general discussion, someone got up and took the point that the 2/3 rule had not been repealed, because the revised rule had not been carried by a 2/3 majority, and a letter written by the late Lord Macnaghten to Dr. Trail to this effect was read. I irreverently remarked that this was nonsense, and then it appeared that the opposition had taken Council's opinion on the point, and that Council agreed with Lord Macnaghten that the rule could only be repealed by a 2/3 majority. I pointed out that a law lord is only infallible when sitting in the House of Lords, and that he can be wrong elsewhere, like any other citizen. But needless to say, this was not taken seriously, and we were informed that if we persisted in our evil courses, and if the Council's proposal was carried, the matter would be challenged in the courts. What Lord Macnaghten really did advise was never made clear, nor the facts on which his opinion was based. The captain, who was in the chair, ruled against the objection, and in order to reach finality without litigation, the council offered to accept an amendment that the proposal be carried with 2 limitations. First, that there should be no caddies employed on Sunday, and second, that play should commence at the last hole and finish at the old gasworks hole, which would have confined all the play to the north of Bushmills Road. This was rejected with scorn, and the motion was therefore put to the meeting without amendment and without any condition being annexed to it, and carried by a majority just short of 2/3 of the votes cast. Having taken the trouble to see where we stood before the meeting, I knew that the 2/3 rule, having been passed by a bare majority, could be repealed by a bare majority, and that when it was done, the rule prohibiting Sunday golf could be repealed without reference to it, so that even if the 2/3 rule had not been dropped before the meeting, it could, prior to the substantive motion, have been got out of the way by a resolution repealing it, which would have required a bare majority only. There was therefore no breach of faith or trap or anything immoral in the procedure adopted. The right to appeal the 2/3 rule by a bare majority was clear, and it was immaterial whether it was done when the rules were revised by dropping it or by a motion at the subsequent general meeting, if there was a majority in favour of Sunday golf. This ended a long, drawn-out contest in accordance with the wishes of the majority of the club. When the meeting was over, I remember being asked on all sides if I was sure we were right. Before answering, I went down to the post office and wired a retainer to Edward Murphy, then on vacation in Scotland. I then came back and said that all necessary precautions had been taken and that the resolution was as sound as the Bill of Rights. In due course, the writ was served and we came to hearing in the Chancery Division, the plaintiffs claiming that the 2/3 rule still stood unrepealed and that playing golf on a Sunday was contrary to the Lord's Day Observance Act of William III. The council pleaded that the courts would not intervene in the affairs of the club unless property or rights were involved, that the rule was properly repealed and that the Lord's Day Observance Act does not apply to golf. Judgment was for the council on the first two issues, but as I recollect, the Lord's Day plea was not persisted in. The Attorney General Richard Best argued the case for the plaintiffs, and as he was sitting down, the defendants' counsel said, "What about the Lord's Day Observance Act? Are you running away from it?" The counsel who had advised the proceedings pulled the Attorney General by the gown and said, "Oh no, we rely on it most strongly." "Perhaps you will read it," was the answer, whereupon the Attorney General read the section which prohibits hurley, football and divers games used as a pretense for gathering evilly disposed people together for unlawful purposes on a Sunday. The penalty prescribed by the section is a fine of 1 shilling for each offence and to stand in the stocks for the space of 3 hours. This the Attorney General omitted, but being again challenged had to read it, whereupon there was a roar of laughter in court, and nothing more was heard of King William, and this issue, as far as I can remember, was never decided. The costs of this action, which were awarded to the council, came to about £400, and I've often wondered who paid them. I am sure, however, the bill was a salutary lesson to somebody.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.